Seattle Pacific University and Texas Christian University, three major centers. And so it just was interesting that it was right next door to Glen Ellen, and which is where Chris and I, the student in the class, she's not here. It's not here now, but she talked about it as being between the two. And the other side of her town was the place, a small town with a Ferrari and a Jaguar dealer, and she described it as conspicuous consumption. Okay, so three very different lifestyles in a small geographic distance from one another. Okay, does this matter? I'm suggesting, and we will show you in a second, how important this kind of thing is. Does it relate to China? Does it relate to Trump? Does it relate to protests with Brexit? Does it relate to the Middle East, to Syria and ISIS? Yes, that's the point. These are all increasingly politically, culturally informed. Whoops! No, I don't have my cell phone. So we've got one. Can you at least can we make
yeah,
audio,
I'm already recording.
Audio backup?
Yep.
Okay, so if you're doing that, then we got audio. And, Tim, you don't have an extra just cell phone of your own? No.
Only one.
Okay, if you could try maybe, if I forget mine, so if you have yours, then you could just do a voice memos.
Okay.
As a general backup.
Are the two the populist dynamics and the MPSA?
Yes, please.
21 first.
Populist. Most people, most of the media cover this with national leaders like Trump, like the president of China, like Macron, president of France, and so forth. That they capture attention most immediately, but they are dealing with underlying differences, which we, as social scientists, as intellectuals, can analyze and try to say where and why are these patterns emerging, and what's the meaning of them more. Yeah. That's great. We had a session on populist dynamics, international comparisons. This is the European Sociological Association meeting about a month ago. And people talked about Brexit, about these patterns then there was a meeting in Delhi, India, again on scenes, cafes, and how these fit into bigger international dynamics. Okay, so I'm first going to do a very brief overview of the idea of scenes, reminding you of all those pages you've read carefully, or will read more carefully. But as in the last 2 or 3 books, which I've tried to give you an overview, I've said here's a 1-page summary. I did this for the New Political Culture book. I did this for the Kentucky Karaoke book, and here it is for Scenescapes. This is the 1-page core thing to remember. There are 15 different scenes dimensions, and they in turn come from legitimacy, theatricality, and authenticity. But these in turn answer the question that the guy in the last row asked. I don't see him now, but he asked last week. He said, "You're talking about consumption, but isn't that an entertainment? Isn't that too vague in general?" And I said, yes, it's too vague in general. And on Monday, when we read Scenescapes, we'll give you specifics. Okay, where do these things come from? These come from the two. First of all, they come from the 2 books that we talked about before. The new political culture. That is, initially with the new political, not just I, but people talking, writing, arguing about this, talked about. The news with the new political culture was social issues matter, like abortion, like sustainability, like women's rights, like gays, etc. Human rights. Okay, those were all just called social issues 20 years ago. Fiscal issues are clearly still there, taxes, etc. Specific government programs, of course. However, how can we add more meaning and specifics than just those kinds of categories? How to do that is a big question. So we started with detailing more types of entertainment, and we talked a little bit about the last time. We then got data, and we talked about amenities, the ideas of amenities and consumption, which have been studied by the economists. With data like cafes or juice bars or opera houses or baseball stadiums in downtown Detroit. How do we go beyond just this list of individual amenities and add more meaning to the amenities is what we do here. And we wanted to do it, and many of these ideas which I've presented in these last 3 books have come not just out of my head, they come from lots of people working together. I'm president of the urban section of the International Sociological Association, RC3, Research Committee 3, and it's been meeting for decades. And we've got people who come in and out and argue and talk and get new data and exchange their data with each other and so forth. We met in Toronto about last summer. That is, we have a 4-year World Congress of the ISA. Then there are people who keep going. And so the SCENES project emerged from that, as did an earlier project called Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation. Okay, so these things we started with examples of making more sense. So we talked about Bohemia a bit, because that's been discussed by Balzac, by Baudelaire, etc. And it's widely discussed. Greenwich Village, Jane Jacobs, and in Chicago, Wicker Park, San Francisco. Clearly, that's one kind of thing. But so we started with looking for these ideal types like that. Bobos. David Brooks wrote a book about. That's 2 books about, etc. But we wanted not just to describe an individual scene. We wanted to compare all kinds of scenes in every zip code of the United States and every country of the world. So we said we need some concepts that are more abstract and that can be applicable if we combine them in different ways, and that we spent a year developing these 15. Reading histories of theory, histories of philosophy, cross-national comparisons, survey research on the World Values Survey, so empirical as well as abstract theoretical stuff, and then put it together in this, to Dan Silver, Clemente Navarro, Larry Rothfield especially, came up with these 15 dimensions. We also then, and we'll show you in a bit, some of their specific meanings, but the idea is we can characterize a Wheaton, Illinois, or a Glen Ellen, Illinois, by their relative strength on all these different things. And then instead of saying we have the left and the right, or the good and the bad, or the rich and the poor, I mean, we're going beyond Marx, we're going beyond Bourdieu, we're going beyond these simpler classifications of high and low because they're too simple. They don't capture the differences. The incomes are probably about the same in those 3 towns. It's not rich versus poor. It's not white versus black. It's not one or different ethnic group. These are people whose values are different. That's the key thing, and that's increasingly important. When I say it's increasingly important, that's a big issue. And so here are some scenes indicators, just examples, and I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about this in 5 or 10 minutes. But these are examples of how we measure the 15 dimensions. We've got hundreds of these kinds of specific body-piercing studios, tattoo parlors, adult entertainment nightclubs, etc., comedy and dance clubs. These you don't have in Wheaton, Illinois, etc. no transgression. And so it gets a strong negative score on those kinds of things because Wheaton is different from Glen Ellen. Okay, then here, this is close to what you saw before with the new political culture. What's new here with the Scenescapes book? This is I guess a second important point for the whole Scenescapes book is that it's close to the new political culture, but we add the cultural factors explicitly. These are not just, a small point. These have grown more important. Just a second, I'll show you where and why. But the two big examples are the end of the absolutism, if it's small for you, it's too small for you to be right here. End of the decline in the Cartesian, end of absolutes, the decline of Cartesian certainty, and of Newtonian kind of mechanical conceptions that things are absolute and fixed. Instead, we have cultural pluralism in mathematics, in physics, in psychology, and in culture and values. The rise of plurality, hermeneutics, pragmatism, multiculturalism, Picasso, Einstein. The revolution was among these intellectuals was especially the end of the 19th century. So think of Picasso and Einstein. And these then have gotten stronger and more pronounced. And this is my dramatic illustration of how these have gotten stronger and more pronounced. These are not just Glen Ellen versus Wheaton. We take the whole U.S., we take every zip code, 45,000 zip codes in the whole U.S., we give them each a score on each of those 15 dimensions, and here are 3 of the 15, and here are 3 more of the 15. Neighborly, traditional, and formal. So this is more Wheaton, small town, more Gemeinschaft. This is the big city, rationalist, self-expressive, and transgressive. In 1996, so we then simply correlate these with presidential voting, Republican and Democrat in the U.S. in each of the 4 years of presidential. This is very simple numbers, no fancy statistics. Just how much do those zip codes, or those in congressional districts, where people are more transgressive, how likely, if you live in a transgressive zip code and neighborhood, are you more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? In 1996, there wasn't much difference. You and your neighbors could have gone either way, more or less. That is, none of these 6 dimensions predicted presidential voting strongly at all. In that sense, social issues were pretty more segregated, separate from the political ideology, the programs of leaders, and so forth. Every 4 years that changed, and this is the last is the Trump versus Hillary Clinton election. So the point is, it's not just Trump versus Hillary Clinton. The same patterns of segregation, cultural distinctiveness, have been increasing every 4 years since 1996. And if we go back and look at other indicators, as we saw in the earlier books, New Political Culture, etc., these patterns have been becoming more important in the U.S. and around the world. That's the important news. This is not just the U.S. That's the point of the populist leaders. That Trump is each leader, each person is unique, for sure. And so what we want to analyze this is not to talk about the names of countries or the names of leaders, but to say what are the dimensions which they can variously combine and recombine. So I mentioned that Ford, the governor and the mayor of Toronto, were populist like Trump in some respects, against the artists, against the bicyclists. But Ford has much support with the new immigrants to Toronto. Many new immigrants favor him, again, whereas Trump is the opposite. Trump is anti-immigrant. So there are important differences among these leaders, So we don't just want to talk about names, we want to talk about more specific dimensions. Okay. What should we do to show to access the internet to show the video? That's on the, yeah,
Where is that?
Yeah, so maybe open, we didn't do it. Open the file, show me the file from the USB. I can't see the thing.
This looks a little bigger.
Go into UPA, and then we want the populist, UPA scenes dot, and then just click on the, click on there. Okay, that's good, and then kill that, and then just turn it on. Okay, so here is a specific example, and sorry, just before you turn it on. Watch especially for cultural differences between this was a critical historical event which is spread around the world. It's not the first by any means, but it was a major element of what you saw in the Trump-Clinton year of protests and demonstrations. 1, 2, you saw it especially in the Middle East with the green belt, etc. In Cairo. You saw it in Kiev that is in Cairo and Kiev. You had the president resigning. The leader of the country resigned after about 2 weeks of protest. So these can be major transformational events of a mayor and of a president of a country if you get enough active protest. But behind the protest, why are people protesting? Because they are experiencing and articulating cultural cleavages. They're fighting over these things in ways that are going on in Hong Kong today. I would add one more quick comment. We can discuss this as we go on. I would comment that the fact that the president of China and the police of Hong Kong have been relaxed enough to permit the protests to continue show confidence, at least you could interpret it as a show of confidence, that you don't have to call the police as they did in Tiananmen Square, or they did in Paris, or they did here in New York. So the ways these things thus are interpreted in the policy interventions and where they are have meaning is also embedded within these. Okay, so look especially. Look at the protest. Look at Wall Street, but then look near the end. Look especially for the comments by the President of the United States, who was Barack Obama, and what did he say about the protest? And the second commentator is Newt Gingrich, who was the leader of the United States Congress majority. They had a majority at the time. Earlier they had a majority. And Newt Gingrich and the U.S. Congress were they were fighting with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton got involved with some activities, I won't elaborate, that led the Congress to say, we're going to impeach you, Bill Clinton. And is this being discussed today? Under Bill Clinton, what happened when Newt Gingrich and the U.S. Congress said, we're going to impeach you, Bill Clinton? Anybody know or remember? Did they succeed? Did they impeach Clinton? Yes, they succeeded. This passed the whole House. But my point is, and my suggestion is, looking at this and other data, that impeachment and the support that the U.S. Congress leaders felt they had backfired. Why? How do we know that? What's the evidence for that sentence? That I just, for my term, backfired. How do we know they backfired? Surveys of citizens. There were surveys of citizens done again and again and again. Said, how much do you support Bill Clinton, or do you support the U.S. Congress? Should he be impeached? And as the impeachment hearings went on, and I'm making this explicit because people are arguing about it right now. Should the Congress impeach Clinton, and how will it be handled? Under Bill Clinton, what happened in the polls? Yep.
The support for him increased tremendously.
Exactly. As the impeachment hearings went on, week by week by week, and you had Newt Gingrich say, you know, you're a loose-living, bad person, Bill Clinton, and so forth, the citizens said, we don't like this guy, Newt Gingrich. We're closer to Clinton, and they said it in the polls. So Clinton got more and more and more support. Newt Gingrich was destroyed politically. That's why Nancy Pelosi is very cautious now. Okay, so let's go ahead. So, but Newt Gingrich is here commenting on Wall Street, as is Barack Obama. Look at. Remember the bar chart, and sorry, not the bar chart, the line chart that I showed you with the fragmentation and a specific event. Go ahead, please.
Dear Americans, this July 4th, dream of insurrection against corporate rule. Occupy Wall Street. In mid-July, Counterculture magazine Adbusters follows its tweet with a call to action. Occupy Wall Street, September 17th. Bring tent. Anonymous throws its support behind Occupy, and the movement's momentum takes off via social media. Citizens travel from across the country to meet up with activists in New York as Mayor Michael Bloomberg prepares for a protest. 2,000 protesters descend on Lower Manhattan. The New York City Police Department blocks Wall Street, and the protesters move to Zuccotti Park, where a culture of consensus takes root. Protesters camp for the night, and then for the week. Little does anyone know, the occupation is just beginning. Protesters receive scant media coverage during the first week, but a few cans of pepper spray, an army of citizen journalists, and close to 1,000 arrests are about to change everything.
We saw in the video you being sort of surrounded and just sprayed in the face.
Police test boundaries and pile hundreds into paddy wagons, and the world begins to watch.
Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street. Wall Street.
Wall Street. Obviously, I've heard of it. I've seen it on television.
New Occupy camps form around the world. Everyone gets fed, and libraries flourish. People want to express themselves, says Bloomberg, and as long as they obey the laws, we allow them to. On October 15th, the so-called Day of Rage, impassioned citizens march in more than 80 cities around the world. Protests in Rome turn violent and dominate headlines everywhere. Back in New York, peaceful Citibank customers are arrested after closing their accounts. Journalist Caitlin Curran is fired for holding a sign. A pepper sprayer is disciplined, and 1%ers post messages of solidarity. Meanwhile, pressure mounts for city officials to control protests. Dressed in riot gear and armed with tear gas and rubber bullets, police raid Occupy Oakland before dawn on October 25th. Headlines blast news about Scott Olson, an Iraq war vet injured by police. His name trends across Twitter. Days later, Oakland protesters strike back with a general strike. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, allegations of sexual abuse in camps surface, prompting Zuccotti Park protesters to create a women-only tent. 10 days later, it's eviction day in New York City. Credentialed journalists are refused press privileges, severely limiting eviction coverage.
I'm filming. I have DCPD press passes. Relax.
Occupations in other cities around the world are evicted. On November 17th, mobilized by crushed camps and torn tents, protesters around the globe turn out for 2-month anniversary celebrations. More than 200 are arrested in New York, including journalists. Feels like Turkmenistan, not USA, tweets Nick Kristof, but not even he was prepared for what happened next. Not everyone, however, empathizes.
Go get a job right after you take a bath.
With temperatures dropping, protesters find other ways to occupy. Occupy our homes, Occupy the primaries, Occupy Congress, Occupy the SEC. Meanwhile, Occupy's income inequality message goes mainstream. "2012 opens with one of Occupy's most violent encounters. New arrests top 400 in Oakland. On March 17th, protesters streamed back into Zuccotti Park, celebrating the 6-month anniversary of the Occupy movement. After night falls, however, police declare the park closed. You want to get arrested, asks Bloomberg? We'll accommodate you. March 24th, Occupy participants marched to Union Square, declaring, "Let freedom spring." 7 months of protests, millions of tweets, 7,000 arrests, more than 100 US cities. Occupy Wall Street.
Okay. We can switch back to the other PowerPoint. Okay, how do we make sense of this? You see a specific example. Okay. What's a scene? A neighborhood, like a zip code, physical structures like Wall Street, buildings, persons labeled by race, class, gender, education, etc. A combination of these and activities like marching in a parade or occupying Wall Street. These are then in turn defined by the values that people pursue in the scene. General values are legitimacy, that is defining a right or wrong way to live, theatricality, a way of seeing and being seen by others, and authenticity as a meaningful sense of identity. Okay, so these are the components of scenes, and we showed you this before, and we showed how these are fragmenting and they are increasingly linked to partisan voting in the U.S. What the book does, Scenescapes, is I mentioned that book. We have 10 books from the Scenes Project on France. We consulted with the mayors of Seoul, Korea, and Paris for 3 years and 2 years. We did 2 books on Seoul, Tokyo, and Chicago, and then Seoul in more detail. On Paris, we have some things I'll show you bits of. But the point is, we've been refining this, and we're still in the middle of it. And there are a bunch of people working together on these things. There are 5 scenes teams in China, for instance, just in China. And we have a lead representative right here, Kiji, who we can ask questions of as things proceed. One of the backgrounds is the arts. And so when we talked about Lollapalooza, and you said Lollapalooza matters, that's just kids having fun. We're showing you more, Lollapalooza matters. Occupy Wall Street matters. Not just alone, but if you ask people how important are the following, this is the answer to Putnam. Putnam's bowling alone, I mentioned this last time. People are joining fewer organizations with one big exception: the arts, music, and cultural activities. When we took out education in a couple of different ways, controlling it, and the relationship is still the same. That is, the patterns are still generally the same. The Netherlands grew the most in this period. The U.S. was very high. France did not increase. It increased a bit, but not that much. Here are. Okay, maybe I don't have all the countries. We got a list of a bunch of countries here. But if we then want to look at arts jobs, percentage changes, is going beyond just organizational membership. If we try to say, how about jobs in the economy? Look at the increase in the percentage of jobs from 1998 to 2013 for performers of performing arts, promoters of performing arts, sports, and similar events, sports and recreational instruction, fine arts schools. These are growing much more than the economy. This is not a business cycle shift. This is a sector transformation. The whole economy is changing, and entertainment, arts, culture, sports, and the like are growing, whereas we're seeing declines in radio networks, motion picture and video distribution, television broadcasting, media representatives, other motion picture and video industries, book printing. These are all going down. Bookstores are going down. News syndicates are going down. So we're seeing this, and these are not agriculture. These are not heavy industry. These are close nearby kinds of entertainment and media. So we're seeing changes within them in a more activist, participatory direction, like Occupy Wall Street and Lollapalooza. This we talked about already. Just notice, if you didn't see before, most of these names are Asian. So we worked especially on Asia, and then we came back to the US and talked about unions and gangs as illustrating organizations where you can participate more, and because the values of these scenes in a gang are so different from the Baptist church, you get more engagement in a direction that undermines trust and legitimacy and leads to more weakening of the underlying pattern. The arts can add buzz, so you can take something like a political rally, and many of these new populist leaders have been doing this very effectively, of teaming up with or framing themselves, talking with, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton would go to Hollywood regularly, would play his saxophone, would hobnob and be on the media with leading Hollywood actors, performers, directors, etc. Rahm Emanuel, mayor of Chicago, did the same thing. He raised a lot of the money for Obama. He was chief of staff of Obama. Then he came back here and became mayor of Chicago, using his connections to Hollywood and elsewhere to link Chicago with that kind of transformation. Then we have Lori Lightfoot, and she is elected now, shocking everybody. She came out of nowhere, but she's against the establishment. There are a lot of people against the establishment, and it's not just media news. This is electing mayors. This is transforming presidential voting in ways that don't fit the normal rules. They're breaking the left and right. They're breaking the Republicans and the Democrats and their normal, quote-unquote, social bases, etc. So these things can be then leveraged, to use an economics term, leveraged, buzz, expanded further. Buzz was also a topic of a paper by economist here, Gary Becker. And he would measure, he talked about, it was a more theoretical paper, but he would talk about examples of a line. If you have a long line forming in front of a new restaurant, and you have another new restaurant with no line, which one is going to be probably the better restaurant and the one you want to get in line for, the one where there already is a line. And so maybe new restaurants will pay people to stand in line to try to inflate the buzz. But the point is, the buzz is an important part of the story. And in that sense, arts may not be the narrow and specific cause of the driver alone, but they can heighten cleavages over unions, over impeachment, over abortion, over lifestyle and conflicts between Wheaton and Glen Ellen and the others. Okay, so this is a little, I'll skip that one, that's a little complicated. Here's Bohemia, simply classified in terms of the 15 dimensions. So in this way, we have a Bohemia score for every US zip code, and similarly for every little neighborhood within Korea, within Japan, within France, within Spain. We can score them, and we've got folks that do this, on where do they rank on not only these, but on the more general idea of Bohemia. And so Bohemians are neighborhoods are especially self-expressive, and transgressive. They get high scores on that, whereas they get low scores on utilitarianism and traditionalistic, for example. Bringing this to the streets, and specifically San Francisco and Chicago, these started in the bike riding groups, and now once a month in Chicago, critical mass, playing music, criticizing the establishment, going to and stopping at certain sites. I've ridden on several of the rides. Stopping at certain sites, communing with folks, and if you ride with them, you see amazingly different reactions as you ride into different neighborhoods. Some places people are waving, high five, hurrah, go for it, and so forth, criticize. Others are, are practically throwing tomatoes and, go home, take a bath and go home, was Newt Gingrich's commentary on Occupy Wall Street. These are fundamental cleavages which lead to people being active or fighting against it. Okay, so all of these variables matter. But the simple point I'm making here is that they're shifted by the Bohemian score. It's not that Bohemianism alone is the simple cause. It usually is what we call an interaction effect. That Bohemianism may heighten the importance of education. It may transform gender. It may lead to shifts in the kinds of jobs which people do. But it's often not seen, and many other scenes dimensions work this way, not just as simple causes alone, but as changing the degree of transit ridership. This was found by Hee-Sung Jung in her PhD, that transit ridership was higher in those zip codes that had higher Bohemian scores in France, the U.S., and Korea. All three countries using thousands of cases, and it led to more people walking and using bikes, because they would say when you interviewed them, I'm biking as a form of protest, etc. I'm not driving a car. Question: what's the cause and what's the chicken and what's the egg? Is it that the arts are driving new kinds of jobs, or is it simply money is leading to more ability to do this and more leisure time, which in turn leads to the arts? Do the arts have an impact on that is? Are there what's the cause? When I call it the chicken and egg problem, I'm giving you an answer, a hint. Both are important, and it depends on where and how you cut into the processes. But Christina Sakamoto is doing a PhD on this now in sociology, and she's spent 10 years. She's finishing it up now, but she's worked in detail. She's the world expert on this at this point, with arts data, with jobs data for every single year, for every single zip code in the U.S., for thousands of kinds of jobs. And so this is the kind of model that we've used, that she's leading on with. So we have arts data in 1 year, and the year before, and the year before, the year before, the year before. We have total jobs minus the arts, that is total jobs in the whole economy or within one zip code. And the key, and clearly arts jobs in 1 year will strongly explain arts jobs in the next year. Same thing for total. So the interesting paths are the diagonals, the one which goes from total jobs to art jobs, and from arts jobs to total jobs in the next time period. And the big question is, how strong is one diagonal path compared to the other? And that says, what's the driver? Which is more a chicken or that is more an egg? And B and Y are standard coefficients of regressions. Which one's bigger? And this is the quick summary is that different income. Oh, okay, so this is quartiles. These are 4 quartiles of income. So this is from the richer to the poorer neighborhoods, with the idea, and what this shows is that these processes go on in all of them, but they do tend to be stronger. This suggests sometimes in the more affluent neighborhoods. But we've now pursued this further in another study with Yasmin Arakan, and we've taken 3 and then 5 and then 7 income quartiles for the whole. No longer, they're not called quartiles if you have 7, they're called quantiles. If you break up the whole U.S. zip codes into 7 different subsets based on income, median family income, simple, and then you repeat the analysis. Does the importance of the arts get stronger or weaker when you're in richer or poorer neighborhoods? And the answer is the arts are always significant in all 7 levels of income, from the lowest to the highest. They're sometimes weaker in the middle income areas, but they tend to be stronger in the higher and stronger in the lower. And if we add percent Hispanic and percent African American, it's a little stronger still, but it's the same general pattern. That is, you have some very strong arts activities in Bronzeville, where I live, and you see that the strong, classic things which are discussed for young African American men, besides gangs, is sports, basketball, and writing rap songs. Hip hop, house, etc. has come out of Bronzeville and related neighborhoods. Okay. So rather than trying to conclude it's one or the other, that arts are more important or non-arts jobs are more important, we then say how strong are those coefficients in different regions, and they're geographic analyses. You can call things with names like geographically weighted regression. But this is simpler. This basically says the arts are more important as drivers in the red areas. Boston to Washington, from San Francisco to San Diego. These are areas where the arts are more drivers, whereas in the South and in the Midwestern areas, the smaller towns, Chicago's interesting sort of. Michigan is in that sense. Western Michigan is closer to the Boston, Washington. And does this remind you of anything? Maybe a little bit of Elazar. Not simply, not crude, but part of it. That is the general Western migration, especially from New England there. Okay. But if we went into types of art, types of culture, types of themes, contrasting the moralism of Wheaton, which you get more of in Seattle, or Seattle Pacific University. We had a guy did a 700-page PhD on Seattle Pacific University with me, and it was amazing about how Seattle over the whole 20th century was imbued with evangelical values. Okay, this we've gone over. Okay, these are other countries, just filling in more. The Netherlands is the most extreme with the rise, with the change and the increase in the arts participation. The U.S. is number 2, but it's not just these countries. There are many other that are relatively high, including Korea. Okay. And who's joining these arts organizations? Very strongly, young people join many volatile bands, stand-up comedy groups, the kinds of clubs that may get created on this campus voluntarily, either with a little bit of support or with zero support. People just are creating new, they have an idea. Why don't we let's put on a little bit of music, a one-time show only. It may not be a club, but it may just be something done spontaneously in a somewhat artistically informed way. This is happening now. you mentioned, what was your example of the building on Richard, Florida? We have this picture here a session or two back in Detroit. We commented about what are the kinds of examples in jobs and little firms in the new Detroit. Here's our Detroit expert. We talked about the outdoor restaurants in the alleys.
Yeah.
Want to just describe that briefly for the others.
There's been like a increase in the repurposing of like sketchy alleys. So they've been turned into like bohemian neighborhoods where artwork is put up on the wall, and there are restaurants that like you can go sit outside in places that would normally be seen as like sketch. Don't nobody want to go in there. They've now been turned into like art scenes.
Okay. So you have almost no money. You may just fold something out of the back of a car, or you put out a board between, at the front of an alley, and put in some chairs, and people stand around and talk. And then, but what they add murals and paintings and wild stuff on the wall, and that gives it a cinematic flair. It adds buzz, and it works. It drives jobs. Okay, Florida was talking about this in more general terms, but this is a simple, very concrete example. And are they old people who are there? They're mostly younger people. Okay, this is now in Canada, just a more general growth and decline, not just of, it's similar to another one I showed before, but that we're showing huge transformations in a quite short number of years. The decline of amusement arcades, of zoos, of CDs, of bowling centers. Bars are going down. People are drinking less. Cafes are taking off. Non-alcoholic beverage shops are taking off. And, okay. Total employees in the leisure and hospitality sector. Some called it the Great Depression of 2004. Did that have an impact on this? This has nothing to do with the, quote, Great Depression. These were booming jobs right through. It went up and down a little bit, but the general point is from 1939, 1991, 1981, 2000, 2005, this is a growing, booming sector. This is the linkage with the classic economic model. That is, line one is the traditional model of Marshall, 19th century, continued by most of the classic economics. The classic so-called factors of production are land, labor, capital, and management. You learned that in the first week of Economics 101. This is what drives economic growth. And when you have new jobs like Detroit automobile factories, you attract people to the jobs. They leave picking the cotton in the South, they get on the train, they go to Detroit, and they work. That's the old model. The new model of Gary Becker here in his PhD in the 50s and 60s was human capital changes the way the economy works. If you have more smart people with more highly educated ideas, then they can make more economic growth by building better computers or an iPhone or many innovations. And we had this section on that with Schumpeter, Jane Jacobs, and so forth. The third extension of this, which we're illustrating now with the scenes and the amenities, is that amenities don't transform. All of these things are still there, but amenities like the restaurants in Detroit can attract young people to say, hey, I'm not going to just go to the suburbs on Saturday night, I'm going to downtown Detroit. And my friends are going there, and we're going to meet at some cool restaurant, and there may be some, I think you said, suburban white kids who also come to those locations. All right, so you get white and black kids, even though generally downtown Detroit is very heavily black. But you get cool high school experience-seeking people who are coming to these urban amenities. And the biggest example is Chicago, where we have, of all the Midwestern cities, most of which have been going down, Chicago has been booming. Chicago has been explicitly following these kinds of things. The mayors have some of the mayors have, from Daley 2 on, have seen this and talked about it explicitly. That we need to invest in amenities, and the city has done so actively with Chicago Fest, Lollapalooza, etc. So, this we talked about. The rise of culture. This is similar to this is just again more data on the individual countries. Okay, so I'll flip through just a little bit of this to give you some flavor of some examples of the kinds of analyses we've done with our international collaborators. Then we can talk, and I'll bring in stuff if you want more specifics. But this is an example of how you can, in a traditional, highly zoned, artistically and architecturally defined city of Paris, the president and the others at the time said, we want to transform the old food market neighborhood. And so this would have been the Chicago, you have an analog of an old food market in most cities of the world. This would be in Chicago, the area just west of the Loop, which used to be, it still has a fair amount of wholesale food distributors, but it has become a bohemian area with many clubs that will have different kinds of house and other music on different nights of the week. Okay, the same thing in Paris, and so they sent out a request for proposals to architects, and they said, we want something that will really change the image of the neighborhood away from this old rundown food distribution center, and this is what they got. Okay, this is the most dramatic, shocking scene within Paris. It's called the Palais de Beaubourg for the name of the neighborhood, or the George Pompidou Center, who was the president of France at the time. And the scene surrounding this building is the hot young place like the shops in Detroit. It includes movies, bookstore, library, art museum, dances, all kinds of stuff, both inside the building. These are escalators going up the outside. And so you get a view of the whole area as you're going up the escalator, and it's surrounded by hundreds of cafes, boutiques, shopping, and people standing around in the street. There are more visitors, if you measure them just by this building alone, not including all the cafes. There are more visitors to this building than there are tourists that go to the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre combined. Dramatic. And what's the major business of France, at least southern parts of France, parts of Paris, Spain, Italy, Greece? What's their major business? Tourism. This is very important stuff. Okay, for the economy and for politics and for everything else. Scenes examples. This is just so you get a flavor of this. This is downtown Paris here, and these are this is Greater Paris. So these are the individual communes outside of downtown Paris. Okay, so we've got data for all of this, for Greater Paris, downtown as well as the suburbs, basically. And this is income. So this is these are high income, and the yellow is low income. These are individual amenities where we sum up a whole bunch of them: museums, libraries, art schools, movies, etc. Okay, are those explained by income? They're scattered in different ways. So this is just a crude total measure of adding up all these amenities. We call the things on the left we call amenities. We got similar things, as I say, for Korea, Japan, and other places. Okay, how about glamour? Glamour overlaps moderately well with income. That is, it's not deterministic, but it is significantly positive here and with other data which we have for the U.S. But how strongly? Okay. Think here now of Bourdieu, of others who've talked of, the rich people have more glamour, they spend more on their clothes. This is Bourdieu and Thorstein Veblen, conspicuous consumption. Okay. If you correlate income with the degree to which a neighborhood has more exhibitionism or glamour or charisma, in the U.S. it's a 0.1 correlation. It's very low. In Canada, it's even negative. That is, the English Canadians still have more than the Brits. Still have the old Victorian style that if you're affluent, and you have this in New England traditionally as well, if you're affluent, you're little old ladies in tennis shoes, you drive a little cheap car, you don't show money. Negative relationship. Spain, by contrast, is more Bourdieu-esque. You do have a positive relationship, and we're reviewing this now because it may be that we use larger geographic units, and maybe that's biased the Spanish data. But it may be. You can see that this might hold more in Spain. Seoul or Korea, positive with exhibitionism, but negative with glamour and charisma. Okay, so again, we have people working on this to elaborate types of activities more specifically, which I won't try to go over it. I'll go over it now until we've got better. We can then go to the other dimensions, like egalitarianism. Okay, this is what you'd expect. These are the classic communist, so-called red belt up there, where there's a stronger sense of we should all get the same income. The 1%. This is the classic redistribution area. By contrast, these are the bobos. They're not in the most affluent area at all. So people have said bobos are just they're rich yuppies, and that it's just income. Not at all in terms of this measure. This is next to the communist areas. These are areas that are more bohemian and may have some income, but they're not the upper income areas at all. Even in Paris, which has a more hierarchical lifestyle than the U.S. Okay. Maybe the French. The terms bohemian and bourgeois are both French language concepts. So most of the French think that these are classic French concepts. They don't know it's invented by a New York Times journalist who went to the University of Chicago and who's a trustee now of the University of Chicago, David Brooks. So you have this in a poem about who are the bobos. They smoke a joint from time to time. They shop in the biological places. They roll a 4x4, but most of all, they prefer to get around on a bicycle. Okay. So it's going through elements of lifestyle and in capturing the specifics that we've measured as well. With the same kind of things with indicators. Okay. So this shows graphically the same thing we did with the numbers before, and then this is too complicated to go into detail, but it shows how subtle our Parisian participants really wanted to show the colors and the specifics and the neighborhood variations, and that you can get different combinations of all these dimensions. Okay, this is the background, just to show you briefly that some U.S. examples of the raw data. This is what we downloaded from the internet. That is, we knew some of this we got from the census, but some of this we also downloaded from the internet, because the census doesn't report things like transgression or some of this will be in the census, but some of it is not. That is, you only get religious institutions in the BizZip census. The yellow pages will give you Church of God, Episcopal, and Baptist churches are the number 2 nationally for the total of these 3 cities. But if we look then specifically at Cook County versus New York and LA, LA has 981 Baptist churches. Chicago has 1,200. If we look at Catholic churches, Cook County has 763 Catholic churches, New York only 342, and LA only 225. So the distinctive characteristic, as I've said for years, of Chicago is Catholicism. Catholicism transforms the political culture, the values. It legitimates many things which are different in New York and LA, but if you go down to the neighborhood, there are important differences by neighborhood, and so that's why we take this down to as low a level as we can. But these are the raw data, but even starting there, we have a chapter in the Scenescapes book called Quantitative Flânerie. It's the concept of Benjamin of walking around. The flaneur looks with his top hat and the ballerina on his arm. They're shopping in the Parisian windows. We can do this now with numbers, and you don't need a top hat or a ballerina on your arm. They're not so interested in that as in the past. Okay. Glamour, nevertheless, is something which that image of the ballerina was used by the Impressionists and others to say this is glamour. And glamour is important, but it gets new definitions. And we've tried to measure it in different ways in every U.S. zip code. From concept to operational tool, we score each of the 15 dimensions on high to low, from positive to negative. And then this is the crosswalk between the 15 dimensions and the earlier ones that we had. So Bobo, Black is Beautiful, Wagner's Folk, Renoir's Loge. These things we started with as more descriptive historical ideal types in the literature. And we moved to the more abstract, but we can go back and forth between them with this kind of simple sort of Excel chart. This is the same thing. We also say this is analogous to the chemical table of elements. It's a way that you can build up from the specific elements, like the chemical elements, and get to new combinations. These are Bohemians and a regression. That is, where do you have more Bohemians? You can do that kind of analysis and relate it to presidential voting or all these other things. I won't go through the details, but I'm just giving you an illustration of how you can do this kind of analysis. Many of these things are in the Scenes book in different chapters. This is different ways of bringing in culture and values, and many of them, I'm suggesting, provide an interaction effect. They transform the way that income works. It's not that they're in conflict with income. It's a question, how do you use your income? And you use it differently if you're in Wheaton and you don't dance and you don't drink versus you're in another town where you buy a Ferrari. Okay, the opposite. And they're 10 miles apart. So this is too complicated to talk about now. This is a simple illustration. How about high-tech jobs? If you have national U.S. data, and the more you have tech jobs and clusters of those, the more you get local economic development, patents, and human capital. That works. But if you then say what kind of scenes, that is, you can have high tech places that may be in a boring town in Texas, or they may be in San Francisco or Greenwich Village. And so if you have scenes that promote self-expression and you have technology, then you get more economic development is the point. And that's the same thing that I showed with the three models from Marshall through Gary Becker and so forth. And these are the different kinds of arts jobs. We've seen this Bobo scene, voting and Bobos. So the yellow area, the Bobos. Glamour drives job growth. Okay, I was amazed at this. If we take total jobs in the whole U.S. and say what explains total job growth from 1998 to 2001 and all across all U.S. zip codes, what's the number one most important variable? Arts jobs. Number two, education. Insignificant crime, cost of living, and county population size. This contradicts, or you don't get this in most of the New York Times media, even most social media don't talk about this. But if we put in then just three of our 15 scenes dimensions, glamour, tradition, and egalitarianism, glamour and tradition is negative. Egalitarianism is insignificant here. Glamour is positive, and then we put these in with the more normal standard measures like county cost of living, insignificant, crime rate just below significance, and others. So these are just, that is, we don't just play with our favorite variables, we try to include anything else that others in the past related literatures have used, and we put them together. Okay, let me stop there and let's have some discussion. With some lights, please. Shut everything off. That is, we may still want to use those.
Okay.
Good. It's part of an answer. Okay. And just in general, I say that. Probably because we keep the screen. What else, folks? I can ask you a question, but two hands in the back. Ladies first.
I just want to say I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, just a little bit louder and tell us where you're from, please.
My name's Caitlin. I'm from Virginia, outside of DC. And I thought it was really interesting how the largest indicator of job growth was arts, because typically you see arts as a job that's not very high.
Wait, just 1 second. We won't be able to hear him. Let's try to keep it to the end instead of having it in the middle of our session. Okay. Go ahead,
So
Caitlin.
I just thought it was interesting how, like, the role of art, and I know you touched on this last time as well. I think it's really interesting how art plays such a large role.
And I didn't know this in advance. I was not studying the arts. I'm not an art historian. You know, I never used the arts until we discovered these kinds of findings. Then I started to talk about it. But go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I thought it was really interesting. It definitely is like a subject I would definitely look into more.
Okay. And almost nobody is doing so. I mean, we'll go the next section. We'll talk about let me mention. There are a few readings. Let me just flag them very briefly. Blazer. Okay, yeah. No, they're not starred, but there are two case studies really on the arts. Richard Lloyd's study called Neo-Bohemia. It's the Wicker Park neighborhood of Chicago. It was a strong, distinctive arts neighborhood. It went up, became artist, then it went down because it became too expensive and the artists moved out. But it's a very well done study which shows how these dynamics worked and how it interacted and generated initially, say, some arts-related jobs like web page designers or advertising staff. People who had an artistic talent went into and created jobs in that neighborhood, and then or the big advertising firms would have a little branch there where they would do web page design or other stuff. So you had these things feeding into certain kinds of jobs, but then changing. That is, they were so successful, they got national coverage from Rolling Stone and so forth, and then it got too expensive a little bit. Okay, the other book is by Elizabeth Currid called The Warhol Economy. I was on her thesis committee at Columbia, and she went to clubs and she did her field work. She went dancing in the clubs in downtown Manhattan, got invited by special people, and then she said, what's going on in these clubs? She basically, and so she focused her work over, as she realized what was happening, on clothes design, major New York City industry, the clothing industry, modern art, sort of contemporary art, and some of those images, and then the third, the music. I think that is basically you get arts, design, and the economy overlapping with one another on the dance floor, talking to one another, and then you'd have someone who's about to do a new, design new dresses or shirts or neckties. They see people with new colors and combinations and doing different things, and they influence each other. So it's not just Bourdieu's idea that these people are rich versus poor. Specific aesthetic themes come together on the dance floor, and so she calls this and elaborates that idea the Warhol Economy. Okay. Follow-ups on point this or other comments? Yeah, the gentleman there, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so in the graphic you showed us earlier that had the amenities in New York, Chicago, and LA. I was just curious if there's a correlation between any of them that you showed.
Between amenities with one another? Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And which ones correlate with which?
Yeah, we're still pursuing that in multiple ways. That is, I think the quick, important, simple answer is there are clusters of amenities, there are clusters of other characteristics like education and income and so forth. But as I showed in some of those bar charts, they're not deterministic. That is, they may be 0.2, 0.3. So the point is race, class, gender, and national origin explain 10%. But there's a lot of looseness, and so I would answer yes, there are interrelations, but it's not as if that it's just one versus the other, or we've then done this, for instance, now in a paper on 3 kinds of neighborhoods, and we illustrate with Chicago cases. We had some help from people here with the 3 kinds of cafes, and one is the downtown utilitarian, cold, more business cafe. The second was Wicker Park, which is a bohemian cafe, which had it's open until 10 o'clock at night. It combines with a bookstore. It has lectures on feminism, on environmentalism, on sustainability, and discussions of those, people coming into the cafe and having these kinds of politicized, engaged discussion. The third is Bronzeville, where you have black power, or let's say black culture and pride, and an effort and that's linked to neighborliness. So we illustrate with these 3 examples one way of classifying subtypes, which may include localism, neighborliness, egalitarianism in Bronzeville, whereas in the Loop you get more utilitarianism. So these are scores that I'm mentioning, like utilitarianism, which you can get by summing up the score on all 300 of the yellow pages, are all about 120 from the visit scores. Details are in the book, but basically we use a lot. We don't look for just one of these amenities. We use all of them that we have, and we score them high on that 5-point scale. So when we say this is a bohemian neighborhood, we're basing it on from 300 to 500 individual indicators and millions of bits of data. Okay. we'll stop there. We can continue with office hours with any of you individually, and we'll see you on Wednesday.